Writing from the soul is the mother of all invention, and 21 Grams is back for another season of this exploration. We will look into the artist and the art they create. Except, this season we're adding the questionnaire, invented by the great Bernard Pivot, to go even deeper. They say 21 grams is the weight of the soul, and this show is the scale. So now here's your host for 21 grams, Joe Compton. Hello everybody, yes, we're live, another 21 grams, and I'm super excited to have next to me the awesome Mr. S.M. Hillman, Sean Hillman, with us. As I always do, Sean, with this show, I always like to afford the guests the opportunity to talk a little bit about themselves up front. So the floor is yours. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
I'm obviously S.M. Hillman professionally, Sean to everybody, Mr. Hillman to almost nobody, actually. Mr. Hillman is my dad. And rightfully so. He's a much better person than I am. That's a deep question. I'm a little bit about me. I grew up loving football and writing and war movies and war games, and that eventually grew into a love of role-playing games as well. And I always balance that idea of that being a game. In a lot of ways, TTRPGs are their own art form, and I think we're at their best when they were more like underground comics, that sort of thing passed around. So that's my street cred, people. I was around when gaming was not popular at all.
It was almost a detriment to you if you admitted it,
right? Yes, I was. So I was a bit of a unique figure in that I was both one of the nerds, who wasn't a very good student, by the way. So I had the smarts, but not the grades. And I was also a football player in high school, and I played sports, like I played soccer and baseball growing up, and I played football in high school because I always wanted to. And I had my moments where I shined, but I was not a great football player. But that's okay. I still loved playing it, still loved the game. But I was both a jock, because I also threw. A lot of people don't know this. I threw shot put and discus in high school. Nice. As a junior and senior, and that was fantastic. But so I was both a jock and a nerd. So I would play football, study football, do a little bit of homework, but then go and play with my games and stuff during the day. So that was my life. That's awesome. And then, but from about the time I was 10, I always wanted to be a writer, and that journey took many, many decades from start to where we are now. But I don't have any regrets. As Bond says, once upon a time, regrets are unprofessional. I'm happy to be where I am in that regard. But life is funny. You go into college going for a degree in political science, thinking you'll be everybody else with poli-sci degree, or not everybody else, but a lot of people become lawyers. But I was going to be, I'm going to take this all the way to PhD and be a politician. Nope. 4 years. I was proud of my degree, got out, and I've used it. I have used it, but I've used it very little since then. And I'm originally from Maryland. For those of you who don't know much about the state, Maryland has a little bit of everything in it. But yes, our blue crabs are better than Virginia's blue crabs. Don't let them tell you that they're not. Old Bay goes well on everything, including ice cream, and in vodka as well. But after some life changes, I moved to Atlanta, and I have no regrets about that as well. It's been a really good. Atlanta's been good to me. So Atlanta, Georgia. So, and here I am.
published author, gaming expert, gaming professional. You
Yeah.
know, I was really curious because we've had. I mean, I know you. We've had lots of conversations, but for the audience, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about when politics really started to come into your life, and how much that influences you as an artist right now. Is it something you've decompartmentalized a little bit? Because I mean, creativity and artistry sometimes don't always mix with politics, or sometimes they intertwine more than people might think they do. But I
Yeah.
just curious when politics was a real big thing for you. Were you always into it as a child, or was it something that you kind of grew into? When did it start to kind of manifest itself for you?
So it manifested itself a little bit in the 76 election with President Carter,
Mhm.
rest in peace, Rosalind Carter. Um, and my perception of the voters, the adults' perception of their president, right? In people who were at the time, so he's a Democrat. For those who didn't know, he's a Democratic president. So when you watch the politics of the time, it got to be interesting because everybody would make fun of him, even though they voted for him. Carter Country, if you remember the show Carter Country, um, the whole peanuts all the peanut jokes all the time, and then you watch him give a speech, and you're like, okay, so this is the person they're making fun of. He doesn't sound like a person who we should necessarily be bullying, especially since he's our president.
Mhm.
Um, and so Reagan comes along, and I understand Ronald Reagan had a lot of, not everybody loves Reagan. I get that. I feel like he was a good president, but obviously had a lot of missteps along the way.
Mhm.
But the one thing I think is true is that he had a very strong, charismatic personality. Not the way that Bill Clinton does, I assume. I still assume Bill still is still charming as hell, but he had a charisma about him that made people like him and glossed over some of his deficiencies as president.
Yeah.
And so that's the era where I came into this interest in the juxtaposition of personal politics, what I believed as growing up Catholic,
Mhm.
um, and what.
But that was a tough time to be a Catholic politician at that point.
Yes, yes, it was. It very much was. It's always kind of has been because you're either
Yeah.
too Catholic for some people, or for the Catholics, you're not Catholic enough.
Well, it's
Unless,
become more polarizing at this point than it has
yes,
become an asset or a detriment.
right.
So
It really has. It really has. Um, and that's a whole other discussion in
right,
and of
yeah.
itself. Um, but so that's why I went into political science, because the study of politics, everything from ancient political views to the economic aspects to what is communism really.
Mm.
When you read Marx and Engels, it's not just very popular sitting around holding hands in your flip flops and nobody goes hungry. That's not communism at all. And I think that a lot of people have this vision of that's what it is, and it's not. Um, and trying to understand why people make the decisions they do, and you find yourself sometimes. Uh, I had my mentor in college was from Africa, from Ghana.
Mm.
He's still alive, from Ghana, and he was fantastic. But because he had that focus, there were a lot of African uh, studies politically that we did, and just that surface level. I've never been to Africa. It was very much a surface level type of thing. But even that made you question the necessity, or politics as a black and white issue. I don't
Mhm.
mean necessarily the color of people's skin, although that's obviously true too. But there's, an ultimate good, ultimate bad. With politics, you see a lot of the shades of gray and decisions people have to make when they're in unforgivable situations, right?
Mhm.
And people probably won't like this very much, but you question sometimes our the necessity of making sure everybody has a democracy, because democracy doesn't necessarily equal freedom, and it doesn't necessarily equal human rights, as we know
Mm-hmm.
from our own country, right?
Right.
So I know. Um, oh, I'm sure it makes you sound like quite the Attila the Hun to people. I promise you, I'm not. But politics is messy, and governing people, billions of human beings, is messy, and it's unforgiving unless you completely lack empathy. Then I guess you can get high on it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have any sense of empathy, it wears you down. Even
Yeah.
studying it wears you down.
And then applying it to fiction and writing, one might think that's a lot of fun, but for somebody who, like you, who studied it, who's entrenched in it, who believes in it, and has certain thoughts about it, I have to imagine that that's a little unnerving in its sense as well, because you don't want to misrepresent how you feel about politics, but you also don't want to present your political aspiration or your side of things without giving it a fictional spin of good versus evil, or you know what I mean, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. You need to so writing often is very much about self-examination too.
Hmm.
And some of the writing, some of it's not seen the light of day, but some of it may someday, examines my own um, journey through not just the politics, but also questioning my beliefs,
Hmm.
finding empathy for people who I lacked empathy for before,
Hmm.
stopping microaggressions where they, you know, no excuses kind of thing, right? Oh,
Hmm.
there were clearly times I'd be microaggressive towards people, and I realizing that needs to stop. So that journey, right? But the thing about that is that informs you as a writer,
Mm.
right? As hard as that can be to look at yourself and saying, I was a little cringy when I was 18 or 13 or 15 or 22, um, assuming you have the capacity to examine yourself and in a um, authentic way, I feel
Hmm.
like that actually does make your writing better. Uh, the day I was very much one of these people at 18 or 19 who was thinking my science fiction especially is not going to have any kind of social commentary.
Yeah, sure.
And so one day I woke up from this madness and I realized that science fiction is social commentary. Um, it's why I think it's if we're speaking idioms, I think it's why it's the superior idiom genre to fantasy. Not that I
Mm.
don't love fantasy. I think, but I feel like science fiction enables us to puts us a framework that allows us to answer or to ask questions, important questions, as opposed to imagining a better or not necessarily better world. But
Mm.
I mean, I understand I do that too, and I understand the need for that as well.
Mm.
But I guess I try to look forward, and it's always been more interesting to me where we're going than where we've been. I say that with 30 credits of history minor behind me, but
Yeah, you know, you and I share a love for Moab Deep and Paul Atreides, and that trek, and that is all about idealistic nature of superiority,
yeah,
and how lineage plays a part also in how things progress or transgress in a
yes,
lot of respects as well, and it's very interesting. And there's a lot of good comments here, and I'll get to those in a second. But I was also going to say, it's funny you mentioned that politics kind of is what is driving um your thought process of yourself and self-examining, because for me that was writing was always the outlet in which, number one, I was always good at expressing myself through the written word, which I'm sure is very familiar to you as well.
yeah,
And it was what I was really interesting happening for me was, you know
I got connected to like Poe and Dune, and those things resonated with me. And then the negative experiences that I had with like Ayn Rand and things, and then getting into Kerouac and then Vonnegut, kind of making fun of all of that,
I love Vonnegut.
and kind of shaping who I was as a writer, but more so shaping me as a person. And what I was finding is that when I was examining, like, I had one of the things that I've always known about myself is I have a healthy obsession with what happens to us after we die. And well, I don't know if it's so healthy, but it's an obsession nonetheless.
Yeah.
And so that's what I always tried to examine in my writing. And what I was finding is that truth was starting to come out, and like I was starting to figure things out a little bit. Do you find that politically that's kind of shaped you as well? That like when you're writing political science, or you're writing something political, that you're because you're self-examining, you're really shaping who you are, and maybe even changing who you are a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Because while a lot of, I mean, I'm a big talker, so I like to talk. But a lot of those changes that came about over the years were reading something or listening to someone or meeting someone who changes your life a little bit, and then writing. You write that person as a character maybe, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I'm not doing this right, and so that you take a step towards authenticity. I apologize for using that word a lot, but you take a step towards authenticity of character, and deeper understanding of how decisions are made, and a lot of people make bad decisions in books, otherwise we would not have fiction, right? And you can make stupid mistakes, or you can, or I like to call them unforced errors, or you can make nuanced mistakes where the reader can be like, yep, I see where you came, I see how you got to this place. I don't agree with it at all, but I can see where you got to this place. It's not necessarily empathy for bad mistakes as it is understanding. But absolutely, then you write that put that on the page, and you have to read it if you're editing it, or if you're not editing it. You read it over and over again, and it does make an effect. It does affect you, right? It does make changes for sure.
I like that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So Anita's here, Tiffany's here, Madeline's here. Hello, y'all. Welcome.
Hello, everybody.
And A.F. Stewart says politics in writing is not fun. It makes your head hurt writing politics. Madeline agrees, and Anita adds that social commentary sneaks in when you're not looking.
Right, Anita, you were correct, because that's how I realized. I was reading a piece. I was like, oh, wait a minute. I'm commenting on the current social situation, current political situation. I guess science fiction is about social commentary. So.
I mean, the thing about like science fiction and fantasy, where you can't escape social commentary simply because you're creating a world, and you have to have opposing views. You have to have some kind of conflict otherwise, why write a story, right? And so social commentary has to exist because of the conflict, because somebody believes something so strongly that it's going to come out in how they act and react.
Yes, exactly. That's great. Politics will, or their personal politics or personal beliefs will motivate someone to either a small or large degree, but it will motivate them.
Yeah, absolutely. So taking all that aside, right, and putting that emphasis into your writing is one thing, but then learning how to actually craft writing and put it into a prose, and put it into a story, and use structure and things of that nature. Do you feel like your political background has helped you kind of with that as well, because you know how to make your point a little bit more, I don't want to say aggressively, but more known in that respect, and hit it and have it hit where it would affect people?
Oh, I would say more aggressively is probably right. Depending on the politics you're talking about, for sure.
Right, sure.
No, absolutely. Wasn't just. I think in general you're correct. In my case, it wasn't just learning we can decry a lot of things about a liberal arts education, but it does prepare you to make, other than people who are in rhetoric, who are even more prepared. If you have a political education, you are prepared to defend your points of view, and you are prepared to undermine other people's undermine, be aggressive towards other people's points of view. If you really pay attention, and I think I had teachers who were almost universally, whose politics of the time was almost, they were all opposites of mine, but I got along with all of them because they were great people. And, I wasn't a complete blank hole to them. And they taught me, through that process of back and forth, they taught me empathy, obviously, but also the necessary skills to debate, to know when to shut up, and to know when to speak up. And so that, I think, I definitely try to put into my characters as well. I don't know that I've ever written a particularly dumb character, right? I guess I just don't believe in them. And I've created characters that are not as aware of, they're not as sympathetic, empathetic. But I don't think I've ever created one who's an outright dummy. And because I don't think that those characters are as interesting, at least as far as the way I write and what I want to write.
Yeah.
No.
I can see that. I mean, that makes sense. Knowing the things that have influenced you and who you are, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, then how gaming has affected your politics. Is gaming a different muscle for you in terms of creating and using politics in that rationale?
Well, I don't know. So one of and here you go. Those who've never heard this will probably not be fascinated, but some of you
That
heard
says you haven't
before.
created one yet, but you might find a reason to one day.
Yeah, that's true. I might.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. So there's a game that Kissinger and Kennedy played that's been around a long time. It's called Diplomacy.
Yeah.
So in 7th grade, young Sean went to the strategy game club because we'd have, obviously instead of recess, we had clubs. And I had no interest in almost any other thing, but it's like, oh, strategy game. Oh, well, and this is during the Satanic Panic, so we couldn't have had a role-playing club. But they had strategy games, and I got, my first day I walked in, I got hooked to a game of Diplomacy. Diplomacy is known as one of those friend killer games because it's based on realpolitik, and it is about deception. It is about making backroom deals. It's dirty, it's ugly, but it's also pre-World War I, which is one of the not just military history wars I've studied a lot, but it's one of the most apocalyptic events in world history. The way that the European powers dragged the rest of the world into this conflict. And the game itself is diceless. So it's all about thinking, and it's all about planning. And you have to literally write down your movement orders for the turn. And so it's meticulous in that way. And of course, you're playing with other, how old were we then? 12-year-olds. And, you're also dicks to each other. So there's that aspect. So my love of history, my love of politics, my love of gaming all sort of came together in Diplomacy. And so that has fostered both the hobby side of my life, where the things I do to go to relax. I know it's crazy. You go to these intense work or these intense games to relax, but that's how I do it. But yes, for sure, that is also um, uh, that has also fed into my interests and fed into that political side. But here's something interesting. Um, as I just mentioned, I grew up. I started playing D&D or role playing games, but it was D&D in
Mm-hmm.
'81, and
So first edition, most likely, I would guess.
yes, right. So I played actually the. Forgive me, my friend Ron, who's probably not watching, but forgive me for being pedantic. The Moldvay version of the basic role playing D&D role playing, um, and there are three versions of that. There's blue, the Holmes edition. There's the purple, the Moldvay edition, and then there's the Mincer edition, which is probably what most people are familiar with, which was different than AD&D. But yes, same time period as that, AD&D. And a whole host of other role-playing games, RuneQuest, Call of Cthulhu, Dragon Quest, Traveler, um, things of that nature. So um, there's a lot of things in this world, and I realize I have a lot of privilege in this regard. When you're a cishet white guy, you don't have as many roadblocks in your way as other people do. But when you're a gamer at the time, and even as recently as the McCain-Obama election, there was a snide comment by, I think, one of McCain's people about playing D&D in your basement. But um, you're politicized, right? Because there's this element of the country that you're in who thinks that you are either figuratively worshiping demons or the devil, literally worshiping the devil, or at the very least, you're just wasting everybody's time with your nonsense. And so that was another lesson in how even when you think you're not politicized, right, because of your body, because of your ethnicity, you in fact get, we're all politicized, right?
Mm-hmm.
People will find a reason to marginalize you if they can. And no one was committing violence towards me because I played D&D, but they certainly committed a lot of emotional violence towards me because of that.
I was going to say not in the physical sense of violence, but probably, other game players probably presented some challenges for you mentally and emotionally. I would imagine.
Sometimes,
and then people who are judging you also probably.
Right, and then then there's the people who, I mean, at the time, it's like, oh, I'm playing D&D. It's like, oh, D&D's a kid's game. I play. I'm like, okay, tough guy.
Yeah, I feel you. I understand that. Frowning at human meanies, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And it was always funny too, because we always think about the jocks being the really mean-spirited ones in that regard.
Yeah, no.
But I will not tell my football friends what some of the nerds said about them, right? Because they couldn't believe some of the, and I say nerds with affection. It's not a negative at all, but they can't believe, why are you playing football, right? Why are you wasting your time doing that? Only stupid people do that. Like, no. Actually, our team has a pretty high IQ, in fact. So,
yeah, I think people would not find this far-fetched or hard to believe that I was a tweener. I worked my way through all the worlds of high school. I was able to, be around everybody at certain periods of time and kind of be in with the jocks, be in with the stoners, be in with the metalheads, be in with the pop people. Like all of that I was able to do. And it's because I think privilege, one, helped me as well in that respect, but also because I think you learn, and I don't know if this is a perspective for you, but you learn that people are people, and and if you have a common interest with that person, it's it's such a lonely world. It's such a
It really
lonely
is.
space to be in, especially as a creative person where you're
Yeah.
isolated with your thoughts and everything like that. And so when you find common people, you just gravitate to them and they gravitate to you naturally. And I never cared about what other people thought of me or what they or how they wanted to label me or put me in a basket or box or whatever. I never
Right.
thought about any of that, and none of that ever crossed my mind. I just wanted to have fun and hang out with people I liked, right? And that's
Yeah.
kind of how it always happened. So
Yep.
but I think I think you gain so much perspective, and I think it's helped me as a writer for sure, seeing all those perspectives and doing that. Along with that, though, and I think this is something that I know you are being naturally curious about other things and things that you don't know about.
Yeah.
Is that kind of a motivating driver for you? Do you kind of delve into that a lot deeper because you want because you're a learner, you like to learn those things, and how has that helped you as a writer?
Oh, that's been a really big motivation. Very naturally curious about, especially about the things that I can't possibly be, that are not my experience,
Yeah.
and trying to, as an outsider, not appropriate that experience or struggle, but at least bring some light to it.
Hmm.
But space. I mean, I'm astounded by space and all the things you can do with it, um, and all the things that we have done with it, and still to do with it. Right. There's a lot, so much more there. And then the oceans, the great unexplored space. Um, just the human mind. What can we parse when are there people who can read minds? Is ESP a thing? And uh, the interesting bit being that I always feel like here we go, somebody's going to leave me a crock pot, but I do think that there is an untapped, maybe even evolutionary dead end inside trapped inside of us.
Mm.
Um, you know, um, maybe speculating completely way outside my zone here. The Neanderthal people or other hominids had some kind of sense, since apparently they couldn't speak, right? They couldn't vocalize like we vocalize. So how did they communicate? Maybe they had some extra sense that they were able to
Mm.
use. I mean, that's a possibility, and that's what the beauty of what science fiction allows us to explore is that while there are some people who will demand, even in your most fanciful space opera, they'll demand scientific rigor, um, which is not a bad thing, but
Mm.
it's all about time and place, right? Um, I don't necessarily need to know how the ornithopters fly on Dune, right? I don't need to know that. I just know that they do, and I'm happy that 20,000 years from now they figured that out.
Right.
Um, so so that those flights of fancy, I think, not only, well, those are the things that excited me, right?
Mm.
How does Rod Taylor in his time machine that looks like a fancy chair, go forward and backward in time? How does that happen?
Yeah.
How does he do that? I don't know. Um, or the Doctor Who,
Yeah.
the it's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside.
Mm.
Those speculations, while wild and very unlikely to be true, certainly spark human ingenuity.
Hmm.
And things like Star Trek not only do that, but spark our hope for a better future with phasers, where you can stun people. It's like, oh yeah,
The transporting thing was always the thing that I was like, "Oh, we've got to get that. We've got to
yeah,
get that,"
oh,
because I
that was
hate airlines.
yes, right, yes, same. Um, I love to fly. I hate the, I hate even before 9/11.
Yeah, it
I
was
hated
actually
the,
probably a little worse, to be
yeah,
honest with you.
yeah,
Yeah, it was a little bit more of the Wild West when you flew.
right,
You know,
yeah,
I mean, now it's a lot more organized, but it's like it's a little too organized. There's got to be a happy middle, right? You
yes,
know.
that's right. Be Elric, fight for the balance.
Yeah, right. Uh, yeah, it's interesting too, when it comes to science fiction and things like that, because you're someone who dabbles in other genres as well,
Hmm.
and I'm curious, for you, does are you thinking about that? Is that something you're thinking about, or do you kind of just go where the story takes you? Because I would imagine that a lot of your science fiction and a lot of your horror involves each other, science fiction and horror. Some fantasy. I mean, obviously, fantasy and science fiction have a natural crossover, but
Right.
you know, so are you? Is it kind of not as prevalent as maybe somebody who writes like romance that's deeping into horror for you?
So I discovered, um, thank you, Rachel Brune and others. I discovered that I actually, so two things I discovered. So the first thing I ever had accepted, uh, got into the, hold on, I do, you can still get this someplace, people. So I'll just, but the Obscura
Eh,
anthology, lots of good things happen with that for me. But um, my story there is an urban fantasy, and it's an urban fantasy that people liked, that really resonated with people. And I was not an urban fantasy writer
eh.
before that story. I was like, well, I guess I gotta kind of have to, and people have expressed an interest in more of those characters. I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, that's got to happen someday. Um, but then the second thing I was, Crone Girls had put out a um, call for anthologies, and I won't spoil too much, although I think it's not really a secret at this point. But um, it's an apocalyptic story. Um, so there is definitely a mash of sci-fi and horror there. And then I
Mhm.
realized, putting two together, Alien and The Thing, and of course, actually, The Thing from Another World being very a lot of my favorite movies. I was like, oh yes, see, I can see. I drew a line. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
there's a lot of sci-fi horror in your veins,
Yeah.
um, and um, I feel like it's not easy, but it's for me, it's easy to grab onto that fear of the unknown, which, as when you study politics, you understand whether you agree with it or not, and I don't, but you understand why how people other people, right? How we create aliens who are really human beings, and we alienate them for our own purposes.
Mhm.
And that is a fear
Being
that,
a Catholic, you probably understand that as well.
yes, yeah, that's true, right? Not that the Catholic Church doesn't have a couple thousand years of its own
Right.
issues that really need to be addressed. But at the same time, especially in America, there's um, you turn a corner and you'll see something that's very anti-Catholic and not based on a particular thing that Catholics have done, but just anti-Catholicism. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, I forgot that's a thing. Oh, interesting.
Well, just
So
being a football fan and looking at the scope of like a Notre Dame, who control their own fate, have their own network, they have their own pipelines, and they
they
have their
do.
own revenue source. They've refused to join a conference
Yes,
forever
forever.
because they control all of that, and politicians gravitate toward that and protect them,
Yep.
and because they're a Catholic institution, they get the government subsiding to them a little bit as well. So all of those things, they all, and yet they never. The funniest thing about Notre Dame that I've always found, especially in the sport realm of a Notre
Hmm.
Dame, is that there's not a single thing that reeks of religious accrement in anything they talk about, anything they do on the field, anything they
No,
do after the game. Other than maybe several priests showing up in the audience. That's about
right.
as close as you get people collared in the actual stadium. But it's so interesting to me that it's all a political machine, and it's
It really is.
predicated on playing to the angle of we're different because we're a Catholic institution.
Right. Yep.
You know,
Yep. Right. Yeah. Like where a Stanford will be, look, or Duke will say, look, we have these high standards, right?
Yeah.
But Notre Dame's like, oh yeah, we're a Catholic institution and we're exclusively on NBC, and that for years that drove people nuts. That
Yeah.
exclusive Notre Dame NBC relationship. It probably still drives
I mean,
people
to the
nuts.
point where BYU tried to follow suit and they failed miserably doing it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know? It's because we're not as accepting of Mormons as we are Catholics.
No, we're not. Definitely not.
You know.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's all political fodder. But
Yeah.
but it's interesting because you do learn how to manipulate and isolate, a lot with those kind of thought processes, and
Yes, you do.
and
Sure.
it makes good villains and makes
It
good
does.
heroes too. So
It does. It makes complicated villains and heroes, which are the best kind.
Yeah, absolutely. And they have a built-in ideology.
Yes.
Ideology. They have
Correct.
a built-in ideology, right? So,
Right.
and
Which
and
you can. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
no, go
cut
ahead,
in.
go ahead.
I
No,
was going to say which you can play towards or against, where the villain is dedicated to that ideology, or really just uses the cover of that ideology to hide their deficiencies as people. Right? Yeah. So
or hide some deep dark secret that they don't want anybody to know about.
right. Yeah.
um, so that being said, I'm curious your thoughts on creating characters and building characters. Do you search for the ideology? Is that the first thing you're searching for when you're looking at it, being from a political mindset?
Yeah, no doubt. Even if it's never written specifically on the
Mm-hmm.
page, I think all my characters have a political point of view,
Mm-hmm.
or social point of view.
Mm-hmm.
They will speak or think or react as I think a person who comes from their perspective would think of react. They will reject or accept, or not commit to a certain situation, um, based on those things. And because I think that's realistic, right? It's realistic for some people to be suspicious of the hero slash anti-hero or the protagonist. And I don't think that, and it's something I try not to do is preach about, like, oh, why can't you trust this obviously wonderful person? Well, no, we understand, or at least I hope my writing, you understand why not everybody gets along, why even good people fight each other,
Well, it's the
why.
title of your book, for God's sakes.
Yes, right, exactly, that's right. Like, yeah, the language of skeptics. Yes, yeah, skepticism is a big and it's true for me. I tend to be a skeptic of everything,
uh,
which may be not good, but um,
but you're
I
an
don't.
open skeptic. You bring it all
Sure,
in
yeah,
first, and
please
then you make
tell me your crazy conspiracy theory. I might not believe you, but I am willing to listen. Absolutely, I am.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Speaking of your book and Language of Skeptics, kind of go through the evolution of how it came to be. I know that you were really chomping at the bit to get something out there, and I know
Yes.
that this was something that you had prepared somewhat ready to go so that you could put something out there. But talk about how it evolved for you in creating it and putting it together, because it's pretty fascinating for people who haven't heard the story before.
So the emotional center of it came from the idea. So let me just backtrack just a little.
Yeah,
Like most writers who put themselves out there, and if you're a writer and you haven't put yourself out there, I advise you to do it. Right? It
yeah,
doesn't hurt as much as you think it does. Being turned down for a story is way better than being turned down for a date. I promise you. Um, uh, Even though not another one is that bad, but definitely. So my reaction to my first couple of story rejections was really positive,
mm,
and at a time my life I was really, I'm very much a fake it till you make it person, or
Mhm.
actually probably a better way to put it is a very stoic. So I can walk around with my
Yeah, that's a much
guts
better way
hanging
to put
out, and I'm just like, it's fine. It's all fine here. I'm the little dog in that meme. Everything's on fire. It's fine.
it.
So it came to me at a dark time, as dark times go, and I was able to find some joy in the rejection, because like my best friend, or one of my best friends who's passed on, he was like, because he's in his mind, you weren't a writer until you actually sent something out. And I was like, yeah.
Mhm.
He's like, did you send some things out? I'm like, yeah, I got rejected. Like, doesn't matter. You're a writer now. And he was not a writer, but he was like, no, you're a writer now. In that in his mind, I was a writer from that moment on.
Mm.
That was a really positive thing for me.
Yeah.
And so as the rejections build up, I can't remember the moment where either myself or someone else had made a joke about Dear John letters. I was like, oh, because Shan. See, I screwed up my own name. There we go. Sean is a version of John.
Yeah.
And so I was like, yeah, Dear Sean letters. That's funny. Ha, 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 ha. And so in my mind, I was like, you know what? I could probably put together my rejects. But it took several years for me to really do that. And at a time this year where, again, things were a little bit low, and you realized that I couldn't just be a writer on failure and theory, right? I could talk a good game. I can talk writing all day. I've been writing since I was 10, which is 42 years ago, or almost 42 years ago. So I've written a lot, and I've learned a lot, and I've read other people, and things like that. But the next step is putting your stuff where people can see it. And of course, if you're going to let people see it, you might as well charge them for it. So it was Language of Skeptics is as much an act of faith as it is the need to join self-publishing, because technically I'd been traditionally published with the short story. So to join self-publishing and indie publishing for real, and to take my lumps. And again, I'm finding even the lumps I'm finding joy in. But the stories themselves are stories that have, with the exception of one, which was not ever rejected, but I loved it so much I put it in there, are stories that were rejected at least once, sometimes twice. And they are experimental across the spectrum. There's one that's outright horror slash folktale, 7-Minute Road. And so I'm a title guy. So I'm very good at making titles, and you can hit me up, and I will give you titles to your stories and books for free, unless there's a lot of you, then I have to charge you. So there's 7-Minute Road, which is that. There's a flash fiction in there, which I tried so hard to wrap up in 1,000 words, but like, no. So what I did is I left it on a cliffhanger, and so people are still like, hey, you need to finish the story. I'm like, oh, good. That's what I want to hear. There's the title, of course. There's The Language of Skeptics, which is also horror and science fiction, what you would consider cosmic horror. My really most traditional story, though, I guess is Come Back in 27 Years, which is straight up hardish sci-fi, but that sort of ironic 50s, 60s, 70s sci-fi that you find out there, which is I grew up reading, which I love the tone of that. And then the lead story, Sirocco, which is maybe some of my favorite writing I've ever written. But there were other selections I could have put in there, and more to make. There's our cat friend. More to make it bigger, but I felt like these 5 stories
For a good start.
Were a good start. Yeah, these stories were what were me, right? Were very authentically me as a writer. Here I am, speculative fiction, some horror, and go. I could say that people who I respect very much have have been very honest with me about them, and I appreciate
Mm-hmm.
that. But they've liked it, right? It's there's been a positive reaction to the story, so that's always good.
Are you a fan of collections? Do you like short story collections?
I do actually. Even though King's The Stand is probably one of my favorite books, although that changes now and then, like with everybody. His short story collections are fantastic, right?
Mm,
That's if we drill down really, yes, The Stand was a big deal in my being a writer, but the short story collections are really where I learned a lot about storytelling, because they're different. There's different,
yeah.
you know.
I like the aspect of that they connect to one another sometimes, and that
Yep,
they can be completely different genres, different stories, but they have this kind of linear connection that is very interesting, and they
yep,
become kind of its own uh, 3-act structure in a way, and it's kind of interesting, you know.
yes. That's a great point to that. Yep,
Mhm.
and there's that.
Dana
Uh,
says Dark Highway rules.
yeah, Dark Highway. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Um, so yeah, no, and I think one of the things too I learned um, from King is kind of how to be meta about your own writing,
Yeah,
because he is very meta about his own writing. He's like very aware of his stories
yeah,
and how they exist in context to his life.
yeah.
Um, and I feel like that's something I'd like to do as well, or I'd like to be that person, right? Very
Mm.
aware of where my writing is in context to when I wrote it or when I published it.
All right, before we get to the questionnaire, I do have one more question for you, and I'm
Sure.
curious. Uh, what is the best thing for you as a creative in being a skeptic? What do you feel like is the biggest strength you gained from being a skeptic?
I think that it allows you actually to entertain a broad range of ideas
Hmm.
and perspectives. Because when you're a skeptic, you don't become as quickly invested in a particular train of thought or particular belief.
Mm.
You interrogate it, and you will often find good, positive things about it in almost every case. Obviously, there's some cases we know are just complete garbage, but um, that you're able to find nuance as well.
Mm.
And I think that for me, that's what skepticism does. It allows me to find the nuances in a given idea.
Do you find it's more positive than anything?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think skepticism has a negative context
Yeah.
because because the skeptics that we are much like the gamers. And at some point, I'd like to talk to you about making an authentic movie about actual gamers instead of what we usually get. Um, but much like gamers and other folks, the skeptics have a bad rep.
Yeah.
If you say, "Oh, you're a skeptic," everyone's like, "Oh, he's a skeptic," or "She's a skeptic," or "They're a skeptic." Um, and the fact is that healthy skepticism is healthy,
Mm.
and so yeah, I do see it as a positive.
And I find the ones who are enlightened, the ones that I have incredible conversations with, are skeptics. I mean,
Yeah.
from Catholic Church to heavy duty politicians, I found if they're skeptical, I kind of gravitate to them more than I would if they are idealistic, because
Mm.
I think they've narrow minded themselves to, or they put themselves in a corner, and created a narrow mind for themselves. You're never going to change, but if you're a healthy skeptic, you're going to at least listen and have an engaging conversation about what you're talking about.
Right. And I don't believe in being one of those people who um, weaponizes skepticism, because I think
Yeah,
some people are
that's a great
skeptical
point.
just so they can
Yeah,
hurt people. Right.
yeah, awesome. All right, you ready to do the questionnaire?
I am ready to do the questionnaire.
All right. So we're about to take the questionnaire, invented by the great Bernard Pivot, and then perfected by the awesome James Lipton for Insider the Actor Studio, and then taken and butchered here by me to torture my guests, or help them solve some critical thinking exercising.
Right.
So Sean, what is your
Yes.
favorite word to write?
Oh, my favorite word to write, um, aesthetic.
Nice. I used to misspell that word a lot, and now I've learned how to spell it, and it's actually it's a beautiful word when you look at
I
it.
still misspell it, but and that's part of the charm. But I love aesthetic. If I can work aesthetic into a sentence, I find that aesthetically pleasing.
Nice. What is your least favorite word to write?
Um, oh, okay, so probably the least favorite word to write is said,
Nice.
which you will see if you read any of my stories.
What turns you on, either creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Can I say Stevie Nicks on all of those?
You can. It's your answer.
Stevie Nicks. Stevie Nicks. So I'll just I'll make a declarative that if there is a God and if God has a voice, that voice sounds like Stevie Nicks. So,
Nice. Well, you're jumping ahead. Let's
okay, sorry.
bring it back. The questions are there. So, all right. What turns you off creatively, emotionally, or spiritually?
I guess I was supposed to say Lindsey Buckingham, but no. Mad props to Lindsey. He's okay. Oh, that's a great question. What turns me off, I think, is probably, oh gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? People who are narrow-minded, a narrow-minded perspective.
Mm.
People are just afraid to live.
So, this is everybody's favorite question. What is your favorite curse word?
Oh. Um, my favorite curse word is probably frill, which is the fucking hell put together for that they did in Farscape. I like frill off.
Nice.
So that's pretty good.
What sound or noise do you love?
Okay, so this will take hopefully not too long. I love sleeping near trains. Some of my favorite aunt and uncle and favorite cousins. I loved you all cousins, but the favorite ones lived in Virginia or live in Virginia, Southwest Virginia, and we coal country, so we're very close to the railroad all the time, right? And many a summer night, I went to sleep with the sound of the railroad coming by. And in college,
Mm.
where I stayed at in college, was 2 blocks from the old railroad in Maryland. And so I went to sleep every night. Like I think it was like 12:30 every night. The train came by, and you could literally set your clock to your watch to it.
Mm.
So yeah, the sound of trains at night.
It's funny because there's a great scene in the movie Seven where they're talking about how they got their apartment in this great apartment, but he always wondered why the real estate agent took them there at a certain time and always had them meet at a certain time and had them leave at a certain time. And he goes, we figured that out the first day is the train going across the railing and shaking
Yeah,
their apartment. He
and
didn't want
checking the
them
apartment.
to not take the apartment because of the train shaking the apartment.
Oh yeah, yep. That is a great scene.
All right. So, what sound or noise do you dislike?
Um, I dislike um, I dislike the sounds cats make when they've been hurt. It's a
Mm,
terrible sound. I don't like that
mhm.
sound.
The screeching one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's one thing for a cat to be angry at you, but it's another thing for it to be or scared. But it's
Mhm.
wounded. It's a terrible sound.
Hmm. What character of yours would put their face on the currency of their world?
Well, literally, one of them became the queen of their own hive. Oh, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. Maybe and her name escapes me at the moment. Oh no, Isabella Crane from 7 Minute Road. Yeah,
Okay.
she's probably the most likely, because Olana from Sirocco is, she's a faceless. She would never put her face on that. But yeah, Isabella Crane.
What other artistry would you love to try and do?
Two things, which are sort of the heart's desire artistries. Directing a film, writing and directing a film. I would love to do that. And playing the bass at a high level. Right now, I can make some noise. I'd love to be able to play the bass at a high level.
So, what artistry would you never try?
Sculpting. Yeah, I don't think sculpting is. I don't think a sculptor and I would go along well together.
All right. So we've established that you believe heaven exists, and that God sounds like Stevie Nicks.
Yes.
So, what would you like to hear Stevie Nicks when you arrive at the pearly say to you when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Surprise! Because I don't expect to be there.
Well, I have to say this conversation was not a surprise. It was as fantastic as I hoped it would be, and I can't thank you enough for impromptuly joining me and doing this tonight. I think it was a really, really great conversation as always. I mean, you and I could probably go and fill 4 hours of conversating on anything.
Absolutely.
But this was really great to get to know you and your writing. So really appreciate the opportunity to take this hour and talk to you about that. So thank you so much, Sean.
You're very welcome, Joe. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate this and all the opportunities I've had to be on Go Indie now. So it really means a lot to me.
So tell everybody where they can find your stuff and how they can get the Language of Skeptics.
So the Language of Skeptics is on Amazon, but you can go to my site, thewickedboys.com, and the link is there. Or you just search for the Language of Skeptics and SM Hillman. I'm on most of the social medias. I'm not on X as much as I used to be for reasons, obviously. But I am on Blue Sky and Instagram and Facebook. You can find me in a couple different places. I'm a convention volunteer at heart. So upcoming in March, nerdygra.org. Go there, check it out. Come to our cool little gaming con in April. I will be at JordanCon, again, jordancon.org. It's a literary convention, yes, that's right, Joe. We'll be there too. Originally, it was celebrate the fandom of Robert Jordan. It still does that, but it's expanded, and you'll love it, I promise. And later in the year, I will be at multiverse.org. These are all .orgs, people. I'm science fiction track director at JordanCon. I'm play track director at Multiverse and video game director at NerdGraw. And I'm going to be at Deep South Con helping out there as well this year. It's also in October. So all that said, I'm also on Hi Vanessa. I'm the co-mod or the executive officer of the XO for the writing troupe. It's currently the Tribe. It will soon be the troupe on Facebook. If you're a writer, if you're a near writer, poetry, screenwriting, this kind of thing, or traditional novels and short stories, please join us. We're happy to have you. And you can find me here on the Go Indie Now network, sometimes on Sundays on This Week in Indies, but going forward till the end of time, I think, or I hope, you'll find us on Zero Means You're Dead, which is our indie gaming connection show. And episode 2 is coming up very soon. And then a week after that, we run what we call Hit the Dice, which is a couple hours of playing indie games that we've spoken about in Zero Means You're Dead. And yeah, I think you'll once we get the details up for episode 2, you're going to really love it.
Yeah. And I can already tell you that Bob Magoo is going to be running that game, so that'll be really a lot of fun. Because
Yes, it will.
I imagine Bob has some outlandish stuff going on, so it'll be really worth it.
Yes.
Something else I want to mention that'll be really worth it to everybody out there, since I've got a healthy audience here tonight, and I will when people see this in demand. Is that at the tomorrow night I have a very special working the indies. Myself and Brian Dan do a indie wrestling show, and usually it's indie wrestling, so there's a niche audience for that. But tomorrow night we interviewed a gentleman named Rye Levy, who created a documentary called Out in the Ring, which you can watch on the Fuse Network right now, and it is a movie about the history of queer representation in wrestling, and it goes over with Rye. We talk a lot about the issues that have stemmed from from being gay in wrestling and coming out and what queer wrestlers face nowadays, and especially on the indie circuit. And so I really want to highlight that because I think it's an important episode. I think everybody will really, even if you're not a wrestling fan, I think you'll get something from it because it's very much culturally based as much as it is wrestling based. I mean, we do talk wrestling, but I will say that it is a real. I'm really, really proud of the opportunity that Brian and I had in the interview that we did with Rye, and so I hope everybody goes checks that out. It will premiere tomorrow night at 8:00 on right here on this network. So go check that out. In the meantime, you can always check us out on Sundays with This Week in Indies, and of course, Zero Means You're Dead is coming up soon. Episode 2, Hit the Dice, is coming up soon, and much, much more. We've got all kinds of stuff going on, and because it's always time to go indie now, and we'll see you guys later. Thanks, everybody.
So